They say the difference between survival and disaster can come down to a single moment. For Richard Green, that moment arrived on a Tuesday night when he least expected it. His billion-dollar empire was crumbling, his team of experts was paralyzed, and the clock was ticking toward financial ruin. But the person who would save everything wasn't in his boardroom or on his payroll. She was standing 3 feet away, holding a wine bottle, watching his world collapse in real time. What happened next would expose a criminal conspiracy, deliver justice for the innocent, and prove that brilliance doesn't always come dressed in expensive suits. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Quisenberry never imagined her life would turn out this way. 5 years ago, she stood on the stage at Georgia Tech, master's degree in hand, ready to conquer the world of financial technology. Her mother, Frances Myers, had worked double shifts at a textile factory for 20 years to make that moment possible. Frances had arthritis so bad her hands would swell by midday, but she never complained. She would come home exhausted, kiss Sarah on the forehead, and say the same thing every night. "Your education is our family's future, baby. Don't you ever forget that." Sarah hadn't forgotten. She carried those words like a sacred promise, pushing through late nights and impossible deadlines, graduating at the top of her class with job offers from 3 major financial firms. The future looked bright, limitless even. Then everything changed. 3 months before Sarah's graduation, Frances started feeling tired all the time. She blamed it on age, on the long hours at work. But the fatigue got worse. She started losing weight. By the time they got her to a doctor, the cancer had already spread to her liver and pancreas. Stage 4. The oncologist gave them the news in a cold fluorescent room that smelled like antiseptic. 6 months, maybe less. Sarah watched her mother's face crumble, watched decades of strength dissolve in seconds. Frances cried that night, not for herself, but for Sarah. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered. "I wanted to see you graduate. I wanted to see you succeed." Sarah held her mother's hand and made a promise she would spend years trying to keep. "You will, Mama. I swear you will." Frances lived long enough to see Sarah walk across that stage, but she was too weak to stand and cheer. She sat in a wheelchair in the back row, oxygen tube in her nose, tears streaming down her face. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Sarah was 24 years old, alone, and drowning in medical debt that insurance barely touched. But she wasn't completely alone. There was her younger brother, John Wright, who was only 16 at the time. John had type 1 diabetes, diagnosed when he was 9, and his insulin and supplies cost over $1,000 a month even with insurance. Without Frances's income, Sarah had to make a choice. Take the high-paying job in New York and leave John behind, or stay in Atlanta and find a way to keep them both afloat. She chose John. She always would. She turned down the job offers, watched her dreams get packed into boxes she couldn't afford to ship. A family friend, a financial advisor named Marcus Thornton, offered to help manage the small life insurance payout Frances had left behind. He seemed trustworthy, professional. He had been to their house for dinners. He called Frances by her first name. He promised to invest the money wisely so Sarah could focus on taking care of John. Sarah signed the papers without reading them closely. She was grieving, exhausted, and desperate. That decision would haunt her for years. Within 6 months, the money was gone. Marcus claimed the market had crashed, that the investments were risky but necessary. He showed her documents filled with legal jargon she didn't understand. He made her feel stupid for questioning him. By the time Sarah realized what had happened, Marcus had vanished. The phone number disconnected. The office closed. The man who had sat at their dinner table and promised to protect them had stolen everything. Sarah reported it to the police, but without concrete proof of fraud, they said there was nothing they could do. She tried hiring a lawyer, but they all wanted retainers she couldn't afford. She was trapped, powerless and furious. But anger doesn't pay the bills. So Sarah did what she had to do. She took a job waiting tables at Maison Bellevue, an upscale restaurant in Buckhead where the wealthy came to celebrate deals and display their success. She wore a burgundy vest and a fake smile. She poured wine for people who didn't see her, who treated her like part of the furniture. Every night, she came home smelling like expensive perfume and other people's laughter. She counted her tips at the kitchen table while John did his homework, and she tried not to think about the life she was supposed to be living. John never complained. He was a good kid, quiet and thoughtful, the kind of teenager who still hugged his sister goodnight. He knew what Sarah had sacrificed for him. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands shook when the bills came in the mail. He promised her he would make it worth it someday. He would go to college, get a good job, take care of her the way she took care of him. Sarah believed him. She had to. But late at night, when John was asleep and the apartment was silent, Sarah would sit in the dark and wonder how long she could keep this up. How long before the weight of it all crushed her completely? How long before she forgot who she used to be? 2 years passed this way. 2 years of invisible labor, of swallowing her pride, of pretending she was fine when she was falling apart inside. And then came that Tuesday in October. It started like any other shift. Sarah arrived at Maison Bellevue at 4 in the afternoon, tied her apron, and checked her section. Table 12 was reserved for a large party, some corporate group celebrating a big deal. She didn't think much of it. Rich people celebrated things all the time. She refilled water glasses, polished wine stems, and waited for the evening to begin. Richard Green arrived at 7 with 6 other people, all of them in expensive suits, all of them radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Richard was the CEO of Titan Systems, a financial technology company that processed billions of dollars in transactions every day. Sarah didn't know who he was at first. She just knew he looked stressed. His tie was loosened. His jaw was tight. While his colleagues laughed and ordered appetizers, Richard sat hunched over his laptop, staring at the screen with the intensity of a man watching his life unravel in real time. Sarah poured his scotch and stepped back, trying to be invisible the way she had learned to be. But she couldn't help noticing the code on his screen. She had spent 4 years of her life learning to read code, to understand the language of algorithms and systems. Even from a distance, she could see something was wrong. The error messages were multiplying. The system was in a death spiral, and no one at the table seemed to understand why. She moved closer, pretending to check the water glasses, and got a better look. Her heart started pounding. She recognized the structure immediately. It was a payment gateway, similar to one she had studied in school. But there was a flaw, a recursive loop in the validation function. The system was calling itself over and over again, trying to verify payments that hadn't been processed yet. It was the digital equivalent of a snake eating its own tail. If they didn't fix it soon, the whole system would crash. Millions of transactions would fail. The company would lose everything. Sarah hesitated. She was a waitress. She wasn't supposed to be looking at customers' laptops. She wasn't supposed to have opinions about their work. But she couldn't just walk away. Not when she knew exactly what was wrong. Not when she could fix it in minutes. She took a breath, stepped forward and spoke. "Excuse me, sir. I think I see the problem." The table went silent. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Richard looked up, confused, maybe a little annoyed. Sarah's hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. Line 283. Your payment gateway is calling the validation function inside itself. It's creating an infinite loop. The system can't process anything because it's stuck trying to verify transactions that don't exist yet. You need to break the recursion. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the men at the table, a thin guy with wire-rimmed glasses, laughed. "That's adorable. Did you take a coding class at community college or something?" Sarah felt her face flush, but she didn't back down. "I have a master's degree in financial technology from Georgia Tech. I know what I'm looking at. And if you don't fix that loop in the next hour, your entire system is going to collapse." Richard stared at her. Really stared, like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he turned his laptop toward her. "Show me." Sarah leaned in, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the confidence of someone who had spent years doing this exact kind of work. She pulled up the code, isolated the problematic function, and rewrote the logic in less than 3 minutes. The error messages stopped. The system hummed back to life. The executives at the table sat in stunned silence. Richard let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked at Sarah with something close to awe. "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Quisenberry. And until 3 minutes ago, I was just your waitress." Richard didn't let her go back to work. He asked her to sit down, ordered her a drink, and started asking questions. How did she end up here? Why wasn't she working in tech? Sarah told him the short version. Her mother's death. Her brother's illness. The financial advisor who stole everything. She didn't mention Marcus Thornton by name, not yet. But she could see Richard processing it all. His expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper. Respect, maybe. Or guilt. He made her an offer before the night was over. $50,000 and a consulting contract to help his team find out what was really going wrong with the system. Because that loop she fixed. It wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage. Someone had planted it deliberately, timed to explode during the company's upcoming initial public offering. If Sarah hadn't caught it, Titan Systems would have lost everything. Sarah said yes. Not because of the money, though she desperately needed it. She said yes because for the first time in 2 years, someone was seeing her for who she really was. Someone was giving her a chance to use her mind again, to be more than invisible. She went home that night and told John what had happened. He hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. "I knew you'd get your shot," he whispered. "I always knew." For the next 2 weeks, Sarah lived a strange double life. She still worked her shifts at Maison Bellevue, still poured wine and smiled at customers who didn't know her name. But every night after her shift, she went to Titan Systems headquarters and dove into the code, hunting for whoever was trying to destroy the company from the inside. It didn't take long to find the pattern. The sabotage was sophisticated, layered, designed to look like random system failures. But Sarah saw the signature buried in the code, a particular style of writing functions, a specific way of structuring loops. Whoever did this wasn't just good. They were someone who had been inside the system for years. Someone Richard trusted. She started pulling access logs, tracking who had made changes to the code in the weeks leading up to the malfunction. And that's when she saw the name. Marcus Thornton. Chief Financial Officer. The same Marcus Thornton who had stolen her mother's life insurance. The same man who had looked Frances Myers in the eye and promised to take care of her family. He had been working at Titan Systems the whole time, climbing the corporate ladder while Sarah scrubbed tables and counted tips. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sat in the empty conference room, staring at his name on the screen, and felt 2 years of grief and rage come flooding back. He hadn't just stolen from her family. He had been doing this for years, using his position to embezzle money, sabotage competitors, destroy lives for profit. And he was about to do it again. The initial public offering was in 3 days. If Marcus's plan succeeded, he would walk away with millions while thousands of employees lost their jobs. Sarah couldn't let that happen. She went to Richard the next morning with everything she had found. The code, the access logs, the timeline, and then she told him the rest. About her mother. About the stolen insurance money. About the man who had sat at their dinner table and lied to their faces. Richard listened without interrupting. When she finished, he didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't question her motives. He just nodded and said, "Let's take him down." They worked together to set a trap. Sarah wrote a new piece of code, a digital honeypot that would trace any unauthorized access back to its source. They waited until the day of the initial public offering, when Marcus would be most confident, most reckless. And then they watched. At 11:30 in the morning, just hours before the IPO was set to go live, Marcus logged into the system from his office. He thought he was activating the final stage of his sabotage, the piece that would crash everything and let him disappear with his stolen fortune. Instead, he triggered Sarah's trap. Every keystroke was recorded. Every transaction traced. By the time he realized what was happening, security was already at his door. The FBI arrested Marcus Thornton in the Titan Systems lobby in front of 100 employees. They found evidence of fraud going back 12 years, dozens of victims, millions of dollars stolen. Frances Myers was just one name on a very long list. But to Sarah, she was the only name that mattered. Richard made sure the initial public offering went forward as planned. Titan Systems went public at a valuation of $3.2 billion. And Richard kept his promise to Sarah. He didn't just pay her the consulting fee. He offered her a full-time position as head of security, with a salary that would cover John's medical expenses for the rest of his life. He also created a scholarship fund in Frances Myers's name for students who had lost parents to illness and were struggling to stay in school. Sarah stood in Richard's office the day after the arrest, looking out at the Atlanta skyline, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. John graduated high school with honors and got a full ride to Georgia Tech, the same school where Sarah had once walked across the stage while their mother watched from a wheelchair. Marcus Thornton was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Sarah didn't go to the sentencing hearing. She didn't need to watch him lose his freedom to feel like justice had been served. She had already won. She had saved a company, exposed a criminal, and reclaimed the future her mother had sacrificed so much to give her. And she had done it all while wearing a burgundy vest and carrying a tray of wine glasses. The story doesn't end with Sarah becoming rich or famous. It ends with her sitting at her kitchen table with John, helping him fill out college applications, laughing about something small and ordinary. Because that's what real victory looks like. It's not a movie ending with dramatic music and slow-motion celebrations. It's the quiet knowledge that you survived, that you fought back, that you protected the people you love. It's knowing that your mother would be proud. And for Sarah Quisenberry, that was everything. So here's the question we want to leave you with. If you had been in Sarah's position, watching your dreams disappear while taking care of someone you loved, would you have had the courage to speak up that night? Would you have risked everything to expose the person who destroyed your family? And how would you feel if someone you trusted, someone who sat at your table and smiled at your mother, turned out to be the person who stole your future? Think about that. Think about the people in your life who are invisible, who are working jobs that don't match their potential, who are carrying burdens you can't see. Because brilliance doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's standing right in front of you, holding a wine bottle, waiting for someone to notice. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the hidden struggles people face every day, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that will make you feel, make you think, and remind you that heroism doesn't always come from the people you expect. Thank you for watching. And remember, your story isn't over yet.